In this video, we're going to discuss other social influences on our behaviors, our attitudes, our beliefs. First, we'll start off discussing conformity. Then we'll talk about Milgram's experiment and its implications for obedience. And then we'll finish up with groupthink. Conformity is another influence on our behavior and attitudes. So conformity occurs when a behavior and attitude changes as a result of group pressure. So a very famous experiment in the 1950s looked at this idea of conformity. It's called the Asch experiment. And what Solomon Asch wanted to know is what would happen when a group unanimously contradicted an obvious fact. So a group of participants would go into a classroom, and unbeknownst to the one sole participant, the others were all Confederates or actors that were placed there to contradict this obvious fact. So the individuals were shown a test line and asked to pick which one of the line lengths matched. Although the choice is obvious, the Confederates picked the wrong choice every time. As a result, the participants picked the incorrect choice 37% of the time. Now, of course, this experiment's been criticized. It was done on all white males because that's who participants were in the 1950s. We also know that America is much more individualistic today than it was back in the 1950s. We were a little bit more collectivist then. But we do still see conformity in society, especially in tweens and teens who are very impressionable. Think about how teens and tweens, change their wardrobe to fit in. Or the teen that goes to a party with no intention of drinking, but then asks for the 10th time, do you want something to drink? They decide to try it. So we've already defined conformity, and I want to just talk about two different types of conformity. So there's that normative social influence, where people conform to fit in and be accepted. This is what a lot of teens and tweens feel, that pressure, right? The pressure to dress a certain way, the pressure to have a certain hairstyle, the pressure to drink at a party even if they don't want to. So it's conforming to fit in and to be accepted. Informational social influence is where you conform because you think others have more information. And this is really what applies more to that Asch experiment, right? Where the individual sitting there probably thinking, well, why are these people choosing the wrong line? Well, they must know more than I do. The next social influence we'll discuss is obedience. So obedience is a change in behavior to comply with an authority figure. And a lot of bad things have been done due to obedience. And this next classic experiment describes the strength of obedience. So it's the Milgram experiment, and it was conducted in 1963. Milgram had participants come into the lab and think they were being randomly assigned to the role of a teacher or a learner. In fact, they were always going to be the teacher, and the learner was a Confederate or an actor. So the learner was in a separate room, and when they got an answer wrong, they were shocked. So the teacher was the actual participant, and they were asked to shock the learner when they were wrong. The learner was a Confederate, and they never actually got any real shocks. Of course, remember, the participant didn't know this. So they had a dial, something like this, and it said, when they got up to a certain length, it was danger, high voltage. When they were doing it, you'll see a video on Canvas that you can watch, or you should watch, to understand this experiment more. But they would hear the individual in the room next door, saying stop. Sometimes I say things like I have a heart condition, or and then you would have the authority figure saying you need to continue. Please continue on. So 65% of the participants continued to shock to the highest voltage, even though the learner was pleading and sometimes became unresponsive. The researcher was the authority figure, and he kept telling the teacher they needed to continue. And this is still quite a strong influence today, that belief that we need to do things that an authority figure is asking us to do. And in some cases, it's necessary to keep peace going, but in other times, things can happen that are really bad out of that obedience. Milgram did several variations of the experiment, demonstrating that there were a number of factors that led to disobedience, including having others in the room that did not continue when they thought the person in the room telling them to continue was just a participant and not an authority figure, among other things. Now, of course, his experiment was also done in white males, but it has been replicated to a degree in other populations. Please make sure to watch the Milgram experiment video that's on Canvas. Another social influence is groupthink. And so groupthink is a mindset that occurs in a very close-knit group, where the tendency for all members to think alike and suppress disagreement for the sake of harmony. to keep the group happy. So unfortunately, this can keep really good ideas from arising and being put forth. It can also keep concerns or questions from being brought up as well. It's really common in business and politics, as we'll talk about an example in a couple of examples in a minute. But then I want to bring up to you the symptoms of groupthink. So this is where the group has this illusion of invincibility. So they seem like they're so tight-knit that they're invincible. No one can beat them. Self-censorship. So this is the idea that an individual in that group, they might have a differing idea, they might have concerns, but they don't bring it up because they don't want to break the harmony of that group. Sometimes there's pressure on dissenters to conform. So if somebody does actually bring up a differing idea, others might say, no, well, let's keep that hush hush, right? We want to keep the harmony and the group going in the right direction. And then this illusion of unanimity. So the idea that everybody thinks the same, even though there might be people thinking differently. Now, it's very common in people of power to surround themselves with people that think the same of them. Maybe they're their friends. Going from politics to CEOs, we see this happen every day. My husband's company was a good example of this. I don't think they do it quite as much as they used to, but it was a group of guys that went to college. They started a company in their garage in the mid-1980s. They all hired friends from college and later really continued to only hire a particular type of personality. So when my husband started, it was really a predominantly white, male-dominated company, all straight out of college, and they created a culture. So the higher-ups from this company were all kind of from the same group of friends. Promotions went to people that were really similar to them, and it worked really good for a while, but after a while, they really needed to go in a different direction. They needed new ideas for change to happen and for them to continue being successful and to grow this company. So eventually they started to do this. They started to, hire differently, promote women, put women into positions of leadership roles. They stopped requiring, that everybody in the company dressed a certain way. When my husband first started there, you could only wear a blue button-down shirt on Wednesdays. Every other day of the week it needed to be white, and their ties had to be it was really crazy. It was like the firm. One example of a politician who counteracted groupthink is Lincoln. He surrounded himself with people who thought differently than himself and has been revered in the history books because of his wise way of thinking. I actually think that Obama did a really good job of this as well, because he didn't have just his close political circle in his cabinet. He had people from outside and even people from the Republican Party as his advisors. There are a couple other examples on Canvas that you can watch. One is the Bay of Pigs, and one is the Enron business collapse.